Today's episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast is brought to you by TCG Player, your source for all your trading card game needs. Please consider using our link in the description for your next purchase, as it helps support the continued refinement of our show. This episode is also made possible through the gracious support of our Patreon members. If you wish to join this esteemed group, simply visit patreon.com/The Mind Sculptors and become part of the SCULPTY family today. And of course, if you prefer a simpler gesture, we invite you to subscribe, leave a like and comment on YouTube, or leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts as a most fitting offering to the ever-watchful algorithm Jesus.
This is one of those moments where, yeah. Just the first piece of visual media is my cat's raw butthole.
Welcome, everybody. This week on fucking incredible, man.
We're keeping it all in. Hey, sorry, podcast audience, for just hearing that without context. My kitten has decided to jump up on the screen and be very cute. I think if there is an episode to watch, oh my God, Winona, no way. Holy shit, dude. You can't make that up.
She's just really feeling out the space that is your desk. She's really just,
there's so much
exploring
shit on my
space.
desk. The odds that she would see the camera, look at it, and then jump into it as soon as we start recording are so low. You're a little star. Anyways, this is the Mind Sculptors podcast.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome to our new segment, Kitten Watch, where we watch to see how my kitten handles the mad science lab that is my office.
We're welcome everybody to the Mind Sculptors. I'm Cal.
I'm Ian.
And today we are going to be doing an episode. We haven't done one of these in a while. Where we're both playing in different tournaments this weekend. And so we're going to be going through some of our deck prep that we do and just kind of showing you, a little bit behind the curtain. So we're of what Ian and I's conversations are like when we're talking about decks going into tournament weekends.
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you landed on a list yet or not? Because as of yesterday, you were a coin flip between two decks.
Yeah, so I guess we can walk the audience through it. So I will be playing in the Hunter Burton Memorial cEDH tournament, which will be this weekend, run by Crimson Lion Games. And so it started off. I really think the YouTube audience is getting a lot more out of this episode this week.
Yeah, the people who watch on Spotify and YouTube are, if you just listen, you're really missing some wonderful moments.
some tail-based comedy for sure. But so originally my plan was just to play Blue Farm this weekend, because the only time I've ever brought Blue Farm to a tournament was last time I went down to a Texas tournament for Crimson Lion Game. So I thought it would be kind of funny to just start this tradition of I only play Blue Farm in Texas.
Yeah. I don't hate that, honestly.
Yeah, which is like very funny. It's kind of a good bit. But at the same time, like, I've been sort of fluctuating.
Doesn't spark joy.
Yeah, exactly. And I can definitely make some changes to Blue Farm to make it a little bit more like serotonin friendly, right? But like at the end of the day, it's going to be Blue Farm, right?
Yeah.
Then list 2 was my Glarb list from last weekend. I played Glarb at a local 20-person tournament, ended up taking down the whole thing. And so really enjoy the play patterns of Glarb. Very silly commander. Just looking at the top card of your library all the time. Like it reminds me of playing Elsha, which was for many years my favorite commander. And so
it's like Elsha with good win cons.
Yeah, kind of actually. Yeah, it's Elsha with the ability to just top deck tutor whenever you might want to. But obviously not having flash on your stuff does come up, you know. Elsha also
Sure.
can cast
Yeah.
zeros, which you know, Glarb definitely cannot. But Glarb is a ton of fun to play. Calling Ritual is a drug, and that's kind of where I'm at. And then I was also thinking about loot. I'm a little still in need of some time with loot. I think I could show up with loot. I think I could do well with loot. Loot just feels so raw still, you know, and like that's
Yeah.
my biggest concern with the deck
Have
is
you
like
touched it much since you played it when we were in Chicago?
very small edits. Yeah,
Okay. Because when we saw it in Chicago,
yeah.
I did not dislike the deck. I think the deck has a lot of like potential.
Mm-hmm.
But it certainly has an element of, it still needs to, have some of the like corners shaven down. You know what I mean?
Sure,
Like,
you know, I like exactly know what you mean, right? And for some temporal context, we were recording this Thursday. I'm on a flight tomorrow for the tournament the day after, right? So
yeah,
it's not like I have exactly a lot of time to reinvent the wheel, right?
right.
Which is one of also the reasons putting me towards the Glarb camp, right? Because Glarb is a deck that I've already gotten a full tournament rep on, and I've already had the experience of like, oh, okay, next time I would play this or that, because I had that experience, right? And so,
Right.
like for example, I had 13 mana Emrakul in Glarb at one point, and then literally every single time it came up in the tournament, I looked at it, went, well, I have to put this in the graveyard and never look at it again, you know?
Well, wish this was literally anything else.
Yeah, which is very sad because I thought, you know, a deck that naturally is binning things, but turns out even still paying 7 for Emrakul is a big cost.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, it's interesting. I want to talk a little bit more about the Glarb deck and like how your feelings on it or and
Yep.
whatnot. Before we get to that, I'll just kind of spoil it for everybody. I am playing Tivet this weekend, to the shock and awe of everybody. There was some consideration for playing some other stuff. The issue being that I haven't played. I don't get the reps in on other decks that I feel comfortable taking it to like a big tournament. You know what I mean? In Tivet right now, I've said on this show, I think it's very well positioned.
Yep.
And, I like my build of Tivet. I've kind of got, we'll get into this later, what I think are like my flex slot, I can't say words, my flex slot question marks of, what do I want to play going into this tournament? How do I feel like this meta is going to shake out? Because that's always the question I have going into every event. Is I have like 3 to 4 flex slots, and every event I go into it and I'm like, all right, these are where we tech against a particular meta. And I don't know how I'm feeling. So this is where I might lean on you a little bit later, and what you are going into certain meta games you're feeling.
Yeah.
I have a little bit of an idea of what I should see. I know a few of the locals who should be at the Cincinnati, because I'm playing here in Cincinnati this weekend. So I have like an idea of what it is, but I also kind of like getting an idea from you on like what is, outside of the power rankings, what is going on in the wild as far as like things to expect in tech again. So we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you played Glarb last weekend. How'd you feel about it? Like, that was your first tournament, I believe, playing Glarb, correct?
Yeah, first time ever playing Glarb in the tournament setting. As you know, I was playing at a decent amount of Magicon, but it was just critical EDH's literally copy and paste list that we printed out literally for the Learn to Play cEDH event, right? So very different from the list I ended up bringing. That list was like on Reverend Silence and Bane of Progress, where I was on a heavier Bolus's Citadel style Glarb.
Do you have a list again that you can send me so I can look at it too?
Yes.
Just so I can.
Also, this will be after the tournament. But if you notice, it's called. So my first list was called Glarb, because that's how I've been referring to Glarb. The second list is called Glarb 2. The cops found me because
But why?
because I attempted to be secretive about my deck list and said like, hey, I'm not gonna post my deck list because
Sure.
I have another tournament coming up, and I'm just trying to keep it close to the chest. Apparently, it got posted on EDH Top 16, which makes sense, but it was a small tournament, so I wasn't really expecting it to get up there. And then like I went to click on it the next morning and it already had like 200 views, and I was like,
Jesus
y'all
Christ.
motherfuckers really did your research.
Yeah.
they dug in, and I was like, well, all right, the cops found me, I gotta go hide.
So you make some choices in this list
Uh-huh.
that I want to dig into, because I think there's some interesting decision making, like trees. So we moved off Emrakul. That makes sense. I'm assuming the swap there is Wandering Archaic.
Yeah,
I think that makes a lot of sense. Wandering Archaic in this metagame has been feeling increasingly good.
Yeah, I mean, I love the card, right? And if I get to stick, if I have the opportunity to just like hard cast it off the top, get a little bit of value off of it. It also could be a con sphinx. I know some people have been throwing those down in Glarb, which I don't hate. I get nervous about con sphinx because it attracts so much hate, right?
Yeah.
Is my biggest concern with it. But at the same time, like obviously it warrants that level of hate, right? So like there's a question of like, am I just playing it too safe in that circumstance, right?
Well, and this is one of the things that I think we've talked about this on the show before, is it's playing effective bodies versus powerful bodies, right?
Yeah,
because powerful body, because we've talked about this before. This might be for some of the Mind Sculptor boomers, right? But if you're playing in Elishnorn, for example, as your stacks piece, you need whatever it doesn't even need to be an Elishnorn, whatever it is. You need that thing to stick, and you need that thing to stay on your board and continue to be around in order for your stacks piece or your big thing, whatever it is, to be impactful and to be worth the inclusion in your deck.
Right.
One of the things we've always kind of said about like Elishnorn is, especially in metas where like Gilded Drake is seeing a lot of play, you kind of see this sort of like game of Elishnorn Pong getting played, where everybody just tutors their Gilded Drakes, and then they want to get the Elishnorn, and then everybody just kind of exchanges it. My experience has been you have sort of a similar effect going on with Con Sphinx, except it is, all right, who's going to get the Con Sphinx and then feed into a Ristic or destroy it, and usually I don't see it sticking around long enough to be worth a 6-mana body.
Yeah, or if it sticks around, it gets cloned, and then that turns into chaos.
A whole other sub game. Right? And so that's kind of been my criticism of Con Sphinx recently, is I kind of think it's a trap, because every time I've seen it get played, unless the person has already, like, it'll almost, the times I've seen it win, quote unquote, I feel like the player was already in a winning position to begin with. Yeah. And so like, I don't feel like it necessarily is the thing that put them over the top. It just felt very win more in those. Yeah. That's been my feeling about it. I think Wandering Archaic is a wonderful addition. I think it is really good for the play patterns of Glarb. And the type of stuff that you're doing in this deck. Another change that we're seeing here is you're moving off Cavern of Souls into Shifting Woodland. What is the thought there?
Shifties has been a card that I've been kind of a hater on for a hot minute, but it makes sense in Glarb. Like you have pretty consistent access to your land drops. And
we definitely hyped that card pretty hard. We got really excited about Shifting Woodland.
It has a really healthy relationship with a lot of the permanents in my deck too, right? Like being Counterbalance or Bolts of Citadel, stuff like that. Like really, really impactful when it becomes a copy of cards like that, right? So that was kind of the idea with it. Was like well, Cavern was in there from like the original Glarb list that I had sort of copied to like work off of, right? So like the original one that I was looking at and then just stripping down and then building things up off of, right? And so Cavern was in there from those things, because you can name Wizard, which makes your Glarb and your Oracle uncounterable. But I was like, this doesn't fucking come up. Like that's not how this deck wins. And one of the things with that other version was like they were really, really relying heavily on Oracle Consult as one of their main win conditions, whereas that is not what I am doing in this deck. I am much more in the camp of like I like multiple and diverse win conditions in my decks, and I do not like the moments where I'm like, well, I can't send any of them, even though it's a perfect window. Like I hate that
Right.
so much. So that's hence me being a little bit more inclined to play a card like Shifting Woodland, which just gives us a lot of play in tough situations. Like, for example, as I said, I like Bolas' Citadel is one of my favorite cards in the world. Always has been,
Right.
always will be. And the idea that I can just go, okay, send Bolas, they counter it, and then I'm like, all right, great, play land drop, make us another one. Now it's uncounterable. Like moving on with our day, you know?
Right. Yeah, I think that makes plenty of sense. Shifting Woodland definitely feels like it fits right in here. And then the other swap that we're seeing here is taking out Decon, and I'm assuming that swap is Scheming Symmetry. And I also feel like that is pretty self-explanatory.
One of my only losses last weekend was me killing myself with the demonic consultation.
So you're taking out, listen, I will die on this hill, but blind consults are never the way.
To be fair, it was a game winning. If I get this card, I win the game, right? Like it was a double Boros stack spot, right? Like it was one of those things where I'm like, I need to go grab a Culling Ritual here, or else I'm going to just slowly die over the course of this game, where I have literally untapped Surveil 2 passed multiple turns in a row.
Right.
And so I had to send the consult, and it was the third card on top, and I was like, all right, well, on to the next one.
and if you're not doing Thoracle as your main win con, I think it makes plenty of sense to move off of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I think that makes total sense.
Yeah.
The big change here, and I'm interested to see this because we did talk about this difference a lot last week when you're getting ready for that tournament.
Yeah.
Is Polywog Prodigy. It looks like you're swapping that for Fairy Mastermind. What was your feeling on Polywog and wanting to swap that for Fairy?
So I love Polywog, right? Like I think Polywog is a very good card. The thing is with this deck, a lot of the time the opening curve that I am looking for is turn 1 Dork, turn 2 Glarb, then start playing Magic, basically.
Yeah.
And Polywog sort of like if you have like a Mox Diamond start, for example, it's amazing, right? Like you go like Mox Diamond into Polywog, then Glarb follow up. That's like one of the best starts for Polywog. But that's also kind of close to some of the ceiling for Polywog as well in the deck, because I'm only on 16 creatures in the deck overall, and I don't really, if you take out the math of the ones that actually don't do anything to Polywog, the numbers start to look pretty depressing. Like it's really like every once in a while it might get a level up, which is, I've gone on record saying a lot, like Polywog is really good if you can level it up consistently, and if you can't, not worth playing. And so my fear is that I will not be able to do so, and therefore Fairy Mastermind is just a little bit better. And then also super desperate scenario time, like I can use Fairy Mastermind to clear the top for Glarb, and like occasionally give myself access to more free spells. But I don't really think that's going to happen too much, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, but I mean, like that's the flexibility of like pieces that we talk about too, right? Is it's like your card does this and this, right? Like it's not just a singular thing. Looking at the deck itself, there are some interesting card selections in here.
Oh yeah.
Specifically, there's a card in here that I really want to talk about because it's a card you've been playing a lot in your blue decks, and specifically over other, dare I say, better options. Is Desynchronization is a card that you are playing in this deck, and I believe you're playing it over Cyclonic Rift.
Yeah. Yep.
So walk me through that, because I don't know how I feel about that.
So for the same reason that
that's a lie. I know how I feel about that. So walk me through it anyway.
Yeah. For the same reason that like Emrakul feels like it makes a lot of sense in this deck and doesn't, we get sort of choked on mana in this list, right? Hence one of the reasons that Culling Ritual is probably like the MVP of the deck, right? And so there are ways to produce mana. Don't get me wrong. There's a decent amount, but it is definitely a choke point for the deck overall, right? So having the ability to get up to 7 is tough. Plus, for a 7 mana spell, it is not one that I can cast off the top with Glarb, right? And having access to an instant speed board wipe that I can Mystical Tutor or Vampiric Tutor for is really, really nice. And that's why I'm on Desync in this deck in particular. I think the desync call for me is always, if it's a turbo deck, I like desync, and if it's, for example, Glarb, where there's a high synergy level with it, it's going to be something I prioritize here, right?
Mm-hmm.
It also doesn't wipe my own rocks, meaning I can pick them back, or they don't get picked up with desync, right? And a number of other people are playing things like Bane of Progress, Reverend Silence, etc., to answer all the Ristics, Mystics, etc. But for me, I'm just either using Calling Ritual or desync here, because desync allows you to, like, especially if there's like Ranger Captain or whatever it is, like end step, just like pick up all the cards that could disrupt you and then go into your turn and be able to push harder than you previously would have been able to.
Sure. I am willing to accept that it makes sense that you can cast it with Glarb.
Yeah,
I think that makes plenty of sense.
Yeah.
I don't know that I think I like it better than Cycrift generally, even in like a turbo shell, specifically because
I
of
think
the
it's way better than Cycrift. Like turbo shells just never have the 7 mana to do it. Like this is just from blatant experience.
But it's not about the 7 mana. It's about the fact that like you don't always have to have 7 mana. There are plenty of spots where 2 mana bounce the card stopping me is great. And that's the whole point of playing Cycrift is that it's flexible.
Yeah.
It's the same reason that I like Winds of Abandon, right? Is you don't just play Winds of Abandon because you're overloading it. You're playing it for that reason and the other.
You're looking at it backwards though, because if I can't cast the second half, then it's not flexible, right? Like that's the whole point of it in the turbo shells, right? That's like it's just flip the same argument on its head, right? Like
fair enough. Sure.
Yeah.
I don't know. I see what you're saying. Yeah. I feel like I guess 4 mana is easier, but it just I don't like it.
Okay, yeah, fair enough.
I don't love that. But I mean, like overall, I think the list looks really solid. Like I think that this is maybe one of the best. Like we talked about this before, maybe one of the most like the best fair Necropotence decks. Fair in quotation, like just refill my hand necro decks, I guess is the way of looking at it.
Right.
Because you're able to look after you, like you can kind of look to see what you're exiling with it. There's a lot of the power of things I really like.
Being able to, and this was also one of the things I didn't like about the version that I was messing around with before, was that like I don't think this is a great necro deck, but I know it can convert on necros, right? Whereas I've lent out and played that other list quite a lot last weekend, and I would like, for example, I lent it to NATO, and he like went super deep on necros like 2 or 3 times and was like, "Oh, I definitely can't convert here, but I'm gonna keep doing it because this is fun as hell." Right? Like,
yeah.
But I think with this deck, there's a little bit more of that zip to it, where I do think I have the potential to convert on most necros, and you can determine literally as you're necroing whether you can send it that turn, right? Like you can be like 12
you get to look at the cards is huge.
Yeah, every single card you get to go like, all right, cool, exile that one, exile that one, exile that one, and you can be like 10 cards in and be like, there is no way I'm converting on this necro. I'm just gonna keep it safe for now, and then like sculpt a good hand, right?
Yeah,
which is insane. Like if you're hitting all your mid range threats, you go, okay, cool, like I'll keep 7 and then just go into next turn with a very protected like board state and stuff like that, you know?
Right.
Or
like, I like it.
Like, yeah, I was gonna say, or you should look at the situation and go, oh, cool, Valley Flood color, ding.
Like, yeah. The other thing that I think this deck does really well, if people weren't already aware of it, this is maybe one of the best counterbalance decks out there. Like this deck is so good with counterbalance between Glarb and Sensei's Divining Top. The amount of clearing you get off the top of your deck is huge.
I can 100% attribute the fact that I won the finals match to a counterbalance. I 100%.
Yeah.
It was a match in which I think I hit a 1-ring Winota twice. Like
Jesus Christ.
Several of the interactive pieces that were sent at my board state. Like there was a couple of 1-drops that were off of Winota that were some of the like protective pieces, like a Mother of Runes and stuff like that. Like it was just like Yeah, I mean, cast a 4-drop off the top. Okay, cool. Look again. All right, that didn't work. Surveil. All right, cool. Oh, yep, there's the spell. Flip it over the top. Just like absolutely honks, right? But the thing
Yeah.
is, and this like goes back to it, is like you're just keeping things fair. Like that's the crazy
Yeah.
part is, and that's what I kind of like about this deck. Because like at the end of the day, you look at that board state and you're like, wow, that's very obnoxious, and also is 100% of the reason we have not died.
I mean, like
yeah,
in a lot of ways, it kind of makes me think of like a Soul Tie Tivet in some
yeah,
some ways, like
yeah,
how it plays a like grindy control game plan almost, and then has these like
yeah,
windows where it can just pop off, which is
yeah,
really
yeah.
nice. Like I see a lot of that similar DNA here.
Yeah, I would definitely have to agree. I think there's definitely a lot of that idea of like, okay, this deck is going deep, and honestly, because of the fact that I'm on Bowls of Citadel and on Necropotence particularly, I have
Hmm.
actually considered Shieldred, which, as you know, is a card I have such high disrespect for. But the passive life gain actually does strike me as quite relevant for this deck.
Yeah.
Which is sad because I don't want to do that. But I will say, like on a certain level, it's maybe not the most necessary. It definitely would make me feel better in certain circumstances. It also is like probably could
It,
fight
it,
for
it
the
is
noted deep
it
spot.
shines in grindy games
Yeah,
is kind of my experience with
yeah,
Shieldred is when games get really fucky, Shieldred's great.
yeah.
Um
That's the bar graph. If game fucky, children equal good.
I mean, it literally the fuckiness of your game versus Shieldred's goodness. It's a
Yeah,
direct line.
yeah,
Um, no, I think that's interesting. What are your feelings about like this, like versus like, you know, how are you feeling on like we talked about how loot kind of feels like it needs some of the edges
yeah.
sanded off. You know, that list. Do you have that list available for me to look
Yes,
at?
I got you.
Um, what is it that you're feeling needs to be addressed in that deck?
It's for this Glarb list you're saying?
For the loot list.
Oh, for the
Excuse me.
loot list. Oh, okay. So transitioning over to that deck.
Yeah, the
Um,
Glarb list feels like it makes a lot of sense to me.
yeah,
I don't see a lot of holes in it.
yeah. Shout out to the fact that Cal said, "I see Aetherflux Reservoir, and I do not have any criticisms." Hell yeah.
It just makes sense here. Like it just
I
makes
know.
plenty of
I
sense. You're
know.
doing Citadel. It's a 4-drop
Yeah.
heavy deck. Like it makes plenty of sense. I know a lot of people don't like Reservoir. I'm one of the few lovers of that card left. Like the
No,
last
it
bastion
also
of
won
love
me
for it.
multiple of my games. Like there was multiple times where I was like Thoracle had been binned or something like that, and I was like, all right, cool, just Retraction Helix combo into a reservoir. Everyone's dead. And they're like, oh yeah, I guess, huh?
Yeah. Like I just
Yeah.
listen. They're classics for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But okay, so this loot list.
Yes.
This is a list that even just looking at it, right? Like it is raw, right? Like it. What is it that you feel like needs to get figured out here?
Um it's the consistency angle, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I know by turn 4 or turn 5, I'm probably winning this game with this deck. Like it really does feel like that. Because that's I think how a lot of creature combo decks tend to feel over time, right?
Yeah.
They have that level of inevitability to it. And loot is just a powerful enabler in the zone. The concern for me is I want to be able to get to my mid game plan
Mm-hmm.
ASAP, which I think this deck does, but it's definitely a lot more embellished by pieces like, the One Ring or Ristic Setting and stuff like that, right?
Right.
And so it's much just a matter of like, I have to make sure I can consistently get to the place I want to be with the deck and make sure that I'm not just having those hands that sort of stall out until you draw the fifth land to hit loot, like, or the
Yeah.
fifth mana source, I should say. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think one of the things that I think is maybe partially the problem is like you have a lot of clunky, and I don't know that they're necessarily wrong, but it's like these
Yeah.
clunky wins with like Peregrine Drake and Deadeye Navigator, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like they don't necessarily progress your board outside of the winning aspect
Well,
of
I
it,
don't know
right?
that that's necessarily true. I think they're very aggressive ramp pieces, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
You're right. They are combo specific, right? But they help you, especially if you have lands and things like that, like Cradle, right? They do really
Sure, yeah.
accelerate that plan very aggressively. But I agree. They're much more combo forward cards, right?
Yeah. I also just wonder, like, is this like how good of a dual caster mage deck is this actually?
That one has gone in and out multiple times. Um, I It might not be worth it, right? But like I thought it was kind of cool that there's like, you can have Eternal Witness plus Displacer, or sorry, Eternal Witness plus Ghostly Flicker plus Peregrine
Mhm.
Drake is a combo, right? And then Dual Caster plus Ghostly Flicker plus any land, and then your commander is combo. Then they all work with Tali, and they all work with the cloud of fairies to like be
Right.
basically rituals as you're going through the course of the game, right? So like they're all a lot of these things have like that layering to them, and like Twin
Mhm.
Flame, Eternal Witness, and Peregrine Drake is just like infinite bodies too, right? So like there's a
Right.
lot of like nuanced layering to those combos, which is one of the reasons I thought it was kind of neat, you know.
I I do think it's neat. I think like I guess my thing is I feel like dual caster ends up sitting in your hand a lot of the time. You know what I mean?
There's a solid chance for sure. I think between versions 1 and 2, I took it out of the deck. This is version 3, right?
Yeah.
It was in 1, it was out of 2, it was back in 3. Just because I think like some of these instant speed lines are kind of nice, and my last thought process for it was like, instead of just playing Born Upon Wind, I'm just going to instead play a wind that wins at instant speed instead, right? And that way, because Born feels like a dead card a lot of the time.
I want to push back on the dual caster wins instant speed argument because of the fact that it effectively wins at sorcery speed because of the fact that you need to do the dual caster line pre-combat. And so you
What?
are
No,
in order to win with dual caster mage.
that's only with Twin Flame, bud. We're talking about Ghostly Flicker too.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah.
I wasn't talking about that, but yeah, sure.
Yeah. Twin Flame Dualcaster. No, of course, Twin Flame Dualcaster is not instant speed. No.
Yeah, no, ghostly flicker, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, how does it win at instant speed though?
You have loot, and you win the game. You make infinite mana, then you start flickering loot infinitely. You lightning bolt your opponents to death.
Oh, okay. That's where I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
So you need that loot and dual caster in order to do that. Okay,
Sure.
that
I mean, yeah, this deck is built around this commander. You have him out at all times, right? Like is kind of the idea.
Oh, no, that wasn't me critiquing it. That was me
okay.
processing that information.
Yeah. I got it. Yeah.
That was me like doing a loading screen, so it were of that's how that combo works. Okay.
Yeah. So like I'll have hands like the one I'm like looking at right now, which is just it's like 2 lands, a Birds of Paradise,
Mhm.
a Felwar Stone, a little bit of interaction, and like an Atali. And I'm like, this hand is absolutely keepable, right? It's just it takes time to go like, all right, one piece of ramp. Then turn 2 is the next piece of ramp, right? And then eventually you're like, I have my loot mana, I can play loot, but am I tapping out for loot? Am I tapping to interaction? Right? There's like a
Right.
little bit of that awkwardness to the deck, right? And like that's the stuff that I'm like slightly uncomfortable with,
Yeah. It's interesting looking at this because it's like I think all the pieces make sense.
Yeah.
I just wonder like I look at like a card like Enduring Vitality, right?
Yeah.
And it's like I think it makes sense, and it makes plenty of sense why it's here.
Yeah.
But also I'm just like, how does this get you? That's why I'm like looking through the cards and I'm like, all right, how does this get you from point A to point B within the time frame you're looking? Right?
I honestly think Enduring Vitality is actually one of the more sus cards in the deck, which is crazy to say because Enduring Vitality is one of the best cards in green, period, right?
Period, right.
But I think
but like you don't have a lot of creatures that you're just like hanging out like that you're gonna be able to just tap, right?
It's like for example, like it's like Sylvan Safekeeper right now and like Kitten and Polywog and Spellskite, right? Like for the early game, and then the rest of it is like a lot of medium-sized bodies. We have like Facebreaker in there, so like that's not tapping for mana, that's going in a combat, right? Like So I'm
well, and then
wondering.
you have like
Yeah.
these flicker effects too
Yeah.
that I feel like don't really play into a mana dork,
Yeah.
usage.
And I
That's
will.
interesting.
Yeah, I will sort of throw out too, like several of the other lists are on a heavier artifact count than I am, right?
Mhm,
Um, but I sort of have this contradiction where it's like, and this is maybe where some of the interesting thought comes from, right? I the Cloud of Fairies and Peregrine Drake lines are better with more creatures, right?
mhm.
So if we go too heavy on the artifacts, those lines just get worse, right?
Right.
But the faster acceleration tends to come from the artifact heavy package. But then if Gaia's Cradle is worse, then these layered cradle lines are just significantly less impactful, right?
I can't believe I'm recommending this.
Mm-hmm.
I fucking hate this.
Pop off.
Is Sticker Goblin a consideration?
Is Sticker Goblin a consideration? That's a really good question.
Like that's my thing. It's like,
It's not
okay,
a lot
that's
of
like
red
close
payoff.
enough to Dockside. Like I don't know
No,
how I would.
can't see that it is. It's like there's just not enough. Like what our dockside is in this deck is Peregrine Drake with the Cradle out, right? Like that's
Sure,
what
sure,
Cloud
sure,
of Fairies
sure.
with the Cradle out is, right? Like that is what we need for this deck. If we had more payoffs for all the red mana, I completely agree that it could fill in that space, right? But
Right.
this is a very Simic heavy deck, you know.
Yes. Well, that's why I asked. I was like, I'm looking at it. And I'm like, I don't know that like it gets your
Yeah.
loot out, and then you don't really do much after that. That's what I was
Yeah,
like.
I agree. I agree.
That's where I was like, question mark, question mark, question mark
No,
on.
I definitely hear the thought process though. Like it definitely feels like it makes a lot of sense. I also wonder if like should I just be playing more one mana dorks, right? Like
Two feels light to me.
yeah, 3-ish, right? If you count Tinderval and then Ragavan, right? But like yeah, I
Yeah,
can
I
definitely
mean,
go into a heavier like actual Findhorn, Llanowar, etc. package, right? Which would obviously makes the whole Cradle package a little bit stronger, right? If we have those as sort of more consistent engines,
mhm.
you know.
Yeah. I almost wonder if was it like a Bloom Tender plays
Bloom
well
Tender was
here.
in an earlier version, which I don't hate.
Hmm.
Bloom Tender just like until you got loot out, it didn't tap for 3, so then it was like weird in that
Sure.
middle period, right? Like which is the whole point of like my concern with the deck is the middle period
Sure.
between the first turn of ramp and getting loot out and then the rest of the deck being online, you know.
Yeah. No, I think that makes plenty of sense. I just had the most cursed idea, and I need to look up the card to remember.
Okay.
You're gonna hate it. I know you will.
Love that.
But I'm going to send it to you because
I'm terrified now.
it's not why is it doing that? Come back. Here we go. Was it not? There we go. I have a great suggestion for you. I think you should play this card.
So this will be my last episode in the Mind Sculptors podcast, everybody. I hope you all had a great time. Cal sent me a 2014 standard staple Rattleclaw Mystic. And now my cat is digging into a box of granola bars by my feet. This episode is chaos incarnate.
It's fine. It's fine.
I will not be
I
playing Rattleclaw Mystic, to be clear.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, I think you definitely want to be on more dorks. I don't know. Like I feel like your options are pretty limited, obviously, because
I'm wondering if like because I'm kind of looking at the deck and I'm like maybe Candelabra actually should just be another dork, right? Because
probably
Candelabra's solid, right? And it's really good with Displacer Kitten lines, but like that's what we're flickering loot during anyways, right? So
you're already winning at that point, right?
yeah,
Like
exactly. And I think the Candelabra thing is like now we're having too many pieces that need Cradle, as opposed to like, let's just have our win cons need Cradle, not our ramp and our win
Right.
cons need Cradle, right? Because Candelabra is good, but it's not I think it's more effective in like a Rog Thrash style deck, right, than it will be here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Maybe it's just and Llanowar elves. Like
Yeah, I was not an Arbor Elf because we were on Wild Growth, but I was like, it's probably too high rolly, right? Like, is kind of
I think that it requires you. Arbor elf will make you fetch weird. I think is the criticism there, right? Is it's going to make you fetch a specific way.
yeah.
And I don't think you want them to make you fetch a specific way.
If the green count is high enough, which I don't know that it is, I kind of want blue mana. I was considering Derogatory Speaker, but that also taps you out of blue at times. So let's just put a Finhorn Elves in there for the time being. Yeah.
Yeah. Fuck Llanowar elves. Finhorn elves is where it's at. Yeah. I mean, I think where this is it's just gonna take. Wait, what the fuck? Lily Plash Mentor.
Yeah.
What is exile another target creature you control and return to the battlefield?
It's a meal at home. Like
oh, okay. I was just like, what is this random uncommon? I was like, what?
Yeah, we've covered that on a set review before for sure.
Yeah, well, we talk about a lot of cards on set reviews.
No, come on.
And a lot of times when you're like, this is about a meal, my brain just kind of filters that information out.
Wah, 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 wah.
So so you're feeling Glarb though for this weekend. Like Glarb feels like the pick.
I really want to play Loot. I really don't feel confident about playing Loot. And there's some pretty decent prizes on the line.
Yeah.
I could show up with Loot and I'll call an audible last minute, most likely. But at the same time, like Glarb feels good. Glarb is a solid soul type pile, right? Like it's doing some interesting stuff. My only
10 artifacts.
Hmm?
I'm just looking at Loot and just like my brain is like only 10 artifacts. Jesus.
Well, yeah, because you really just if you want the Mox Opal count, you have to play a bunch of bad cards that do not help your deck at all. Like
yeah, no, I mean it makes sense. I'm just like, wow, that's a lot less than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like I feel like all the other loot lists I've seen that have done pretty well have all just like played like 14 artifacts in a Mox Opal, and I'm like, you cannot get away with that unless you're on Adnos. Like I just don't think it actually does anything if in that circumstance.
No, you don't have a way to convert the the whole point of that is you're able to convert your like Nas into something, right? Like
right. As opposed to like a dead card in most openers.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. But yeah, I would lean towards Glarb. I mean, Glarb very much is a deck that I could see myself taking to a tournament, honestly. Like it's very much Callahan coded. But I would be hard pressed not to play this until you get like feel more comfortable playing Loot, because Loot feels like it just like I'm just like doing like some test hands and stuff with it, and I'm just like, man, this thing doesn't go from point A to point B very well.
They're very fair, right? Like it's a very fair deck, and like we're trying to win some tournaments here, right? So like that's the weird part about it. It's like it does all the stuff that I really enjoy in Teamer, right? Like that all that stuff is absolutely there, and it's just I worry about the clunk hands more than I worry about, because like there are some hands in Loot that make you feel like you're a god, right?
Yeah.
But that's definitely not the consistent thing that shows up, right? Is that the sort of consistency with those. Whereas Glarb, I feel like the amount of times I've just been like, cool, Mana Dork turn 1, Glarb turn 2, start doing some dumb shit turn 3.
Continue to be the cop at the table.
Yeah. And what I like about this version that I've sort of brewed up here is that like it is a cop until it's very much not, right? Like kind of like Plagon, in the sense where it's like it's doing the responsible gaming, it's doing all that kind of stuff, and then if I need to pivot, I'm gonna pivot really hard,
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I like it.
Can I tell you, I lived the dream the other day.
Oh, did you?
It was my winning in for the top, because it was a 4-round top 4, right?
Yeah.
And so I needed the win to make top 4, and I proceeded to go, all right, cool. Like turn 1 delighted halfling, turn 2 Glar, play a couple mana sources, etc. Turn 3 there's a player about to go off, and I'm like, all right, Bolus's Citadel. And my opponents go around the table and they're like, well, we got to answer this fierce guardianship. And then I just lean over and I tap the deleted halfling that I used to cast this Bolus's Citadel. And they're like, oh, right. Yep.
God, do I want to build this? Jesus. This is like my type of bullshit. This is like exactly the type of like tomfoolery I like getting involved in.
And I will say,
I really like this.
Very proud of the fact that I another audible I called right before this tournament was I took out Culling the Week, right? Because that was in there because there's Beseech the Mirror and then Culling Ritual and Bolus's Citadel, right? Like
it feels like a bad Culling deck.
Yeah, so I took it out because it was like it was good when it was good. It was like really good when it was good, but it was really bad when it was bad, right? So the floor in it was like
every other time.
yeah. So like it was either exactly. It was either a game kind of influencing spell or it was absolute dog water, right? And so I was like, all right, let's just take it out, and I swapped it for the Retraction Helix, and oh my god, that won me multiple games. Like the Retraction Helix Flood Collar lines feel so good in Glarb. Oh, I finally got to do the thing that we talked about the other day where I had Flood Collar Glarb out. Holy cow. I resolved the Culling Ritual, made like 18 mana, and then proceeded to, I want to say, surveil at least 30 to 40 cards to try and win through an opposition agent, which was tough.
Well, that was one of the things we were talking about going into that tournament was I was like, Flood Collar doesn't just like the Flood Collar here. Like if this was any other commander, I would be a little bit more sus on Flood Collar here.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that I'm just like, it doesn't really add that much. It doesn't really get you, you know what I mean? Like it's just
like
flash.
Speaking, Glarb isn't even an outlet, right? Like you need more pieces for it to be an outlet, right? Like it's actively
the second half of Valley Flood Collar though is why I'm like, I think it's like an auto include because of the fact that one, you get like a Jeskai ascendancy effectively on your Glarb and get to just like go through your deck.
Yeah.
And it was one of the things that I did like with like Polywog Prodigy. It was like in scenarios where you're in a counter spell or you have Flood Collar out, you do kind of get that passive like bump up.
Yeah.
That is kind of Christmas landy though.
It is kind of Christmas landy, but like even then, like I do miss Flood Collar or Polywog because it could also wear a Retraction Helix too, right? Which is not an irrelevant thing for trying to win the game. So like I might go back on the Polywog to be honest, and like just accept that at times it's gonna suck, you know. So that's one I'm sort of spiritually debating. The other thing I just kind of remembered is that actually, and I might like this more than the Fairy Mastermind actually, is I should be playing Mockingbird in that slot actually, because
for crying out loud, you're not on Mockingbird. Holy shit. Yeah, you should be.
Yeah. And so like not only is Mockingbird good, right? But because of the way Mockingbird is templated, it specifically you can overpay on Mockingbird and cast it off the top of your library with Glarb and have it come in as a copy of something that's smaller if you really need to and you need to clear the top, right? So yeah, I've just made that switch right now as we're talking.
Yeah,
so
I like that switch a lot. Yeah, well, I like your Glarb list a lot. There is a pretty high probability that I will be putting this together in the near future. It's very, very much my style.
Yeah, for sure.
So now it's time to talk about me.
Yeah, it's Cal time.
It's Cal time. Now that we're in garbage time. So going into this, let me share the list that I have with you.
99 Rattleclaw Mystics.
Cal, I didn't know you could do that. So right now the 3-card difference, well, it's technically a 8-card difference from where I was with my SCG Columbus list. The 5 cards different were in the land slot because I didn't have duels to play at that tournament. So I had to retool like the fetch lands a little bit and move some of the lands around so that it worked. But the 3 cards that I'm really thinking on of where it feels like they could be they are my meta swaps, right? Is Windfall, Containment Priest, and Urza Saga. All of them are cards that I like in this deck, but again, I think are better in certain scenarios.
Windfall sucks.
Well, okay, so Windfall I liked a lot more when Shieldred was in the deck.
Yeah,
because it did the dual. Yeah. When you had Shieldred and Bowmaster's, Windfall felt a lot better. Without that, I'm less into it.
Yeah.
Containment Priest, when people were playing heavy Kitten, and I knew I was walking into a heavy Kitten area, I put in a Containment Priest because I wanted to have extra protection against Kitten decks. And Urza Saga is something that, kind of comes in and out of this list from time to time. It depends on how prevalent I feel, or how quickly I feel like I need to get a Grafdigger's Cage out, is honestly what it tends to come down to a lot of the time. I don't know if I want that to be just a land tutor. You know what I mean? So I have in my considering board, like a lot of the cards I've been thinking about, have played previously, and yada, yada, yada. What are your kind of thoughts on, like, what should I be looking for in tech cards?
So the only card that I think is like a must include in Modern Tivet that I don't see you on is Imposter Mech. And I think that card is just an overperformer in Tivet, specifically because it is it's board wipe insurance, right? So, and this is a play pattern we see a lot, right? Like you and I just talked about how good Kitten is against this deck at times, right? What's really good is having a Kitten in Tivet. I cannot stress that enough. But specifically, a Kitten in Tivet that survives your board wipes. That's the thing that I've seen just absolutely ruin, and I mean truly devastate pods. Is this basically vehicle Kitten? And you might be asking like, oh, how consistent is that? Like Kitten's probably like, if there are a list of cards that show up in almost every game of cEDH, it's either in the 99 or in the command zone of a lot of decks.
Yeah.
Right. Like it will be there.
If it's a blue and green deck, it's either headed by Kitten or has Kitten in it.
Right. And like this is like it might sound a little Christmas landy, but like I swear to God, it's every time I play against this.
Oh no, I have done it multiple times.
Yeah.
So Imposter Mech has been in and out of this list as well. That was a card that was a swap for Containment Priest previously. And I have always been a fan of Imposter Mech, specifically because of the fact that I'm, for some reason, one of the few Tivet pilots that still plays War of Invention.
And that energy is like crazy good.
It's fucking bonkers.
Yeah.
I will continue to say that it is just incorrect to not play War of Invention, but
I can
kind of how I feel about it.
Mentality for it for sure.
Yeah. But then the other ones, I kind of look at it. I kind of go back and forth on like Hullbreaker Horror. I liked it at one point. I don't know that I like it anymore.
I don't like it anymore.
It's like it's really costly. It's just really expensive, and then we don't have a good way to convert a Hullbreaker Horror. I feel like Urza is another one that I've tried and played multiple times. I've never been a huge fan of Urza and Tivet. It's always felt aggressively fine.
I think it was much better when people didn't give a shit about Curse Totem, but now we do,
Yeah. I
have a couple cards that like maybe make that a little awkward, right? Like I know you and I have talked a little bit about Dothy in the past, but that does get a little bit worse if Curse Totem's more of a priority, which it definitely is in this metagame, right?
I mean, I play both of them, right? I play both Curse Totem and Dothy, so.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. Like the contradiction of not being able to use your Dothy Voidwalker. However, like I will say, it just being a ley line on a stick is still not bad, right? That's just the concern I have with Dothy, right? Is like, if we're hyper focusing on getting our Curse Totem out, Dothy becomes a lot less attractive, right?
Yes, I agree with that. Yeah. I think the way I kind of always process it is, I don't hyper focus on getting a Curse Totem. I like, what is the game in front of me needing?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there are some games where Curse Totem is a card in the deck.
Yeah,
You know what I
hyper
mean?
focus might be a hyperbolic statement, right? But like more like
Yeah.
it's a priority to us is more
Yeah.
my statement, right?
Honestly, of all the cards that are priorities to me, it's like Graph Digger's Cage is like my biggest priority.
Cage honks for sure.
Cage is like almost every game I've ever won playing Tivet, I feel like I've had a Cage in play. Like,
yeah,
it's nuts.
I also have to ask,
Yes,
in the most loving and respectful way, why
yes.
we are still playing outdated tech languish.
Playing what?
Outdated tech, languish.
Oh, because I like it as a second board wipe.
But it's like strictly worse than nuclear fallout, isn't it?
Well, no. I also don't own a nuclear fallout, so
I mean that part's fair, right? But
yeah,
nuclear fallout's much more flexible, right? Like
sure,
because it's double X, right? So for X is 2, it's literally the exact same cost as languish, gets the thing, and then like the rad counters, but who gives a shit? You were playing Windfall with the understanding that like we put cards in the graveyard that they'll never get access to anyways, right?
Right.
But it also has the option of like, okay, if X is 1, or I guess X equals if 2 toughness less would fuck the table up, it does that. And you can do that for 3 mana, right? And then if you need to go bigger, right, if there's crazy board states, whatever, like you do have that upward scaling with nuclear fallout that languish is capped on, right?
Well, that's why I have Deluge, right? Like that's what Deluge is for.
Well, sure, but that's not an endorsement for languish, right? That's just more of a
sure. Well, okay. The slots that languish sits in, right, is I want to have like 3 board wipes. I have Deluge, Languish, and Sight Grift. Those are the 3 board wipes that I'm like the 2 I'm never leaving home with are Sight Grift and Deluge. Like they're never coming out. But then the question for me always is, do I want to play Winds? Do I want to play Dam? Do I want to play Languish? And I always kind of go between those. And I found that I've liked Languish the most because of the fact that it gets rid of, like most of the time with Tivet, I want to get rid of most things that are not named Tivet. And if I get rid of one of my things that was not named Tivet, then I'm just kind of like, oh, it is what it is. It's the price of doing business.
And I completely agree. And I think nuclear fallout's just better at doing that than
sure. And when I
get
get a nuclear fallout, I will consider
95 cents, Cal. You can pick up a 95-cent copy of nuclear fallout right now.
If my LGS has one, I'll pick one up. But
there we go.
That's not always a guarantee.
That's all I needed. You're arguing like 6 different things that have nothing to do with what I'm saying.
Okay. All right.
I agree the board wipe slot should be there. I love Tivet as the 3 board wipe deck, right? It's just specifically that Languish got one-upped. Okay.
Yeah,
the real card
that is good.
Yeah, real card I want to talk about that I think we've been relying on for too long.
Okay,
Scott Split Second, the little friend I like to call Angel's Grace.
Yes,
and it fucking blows.
Yeah, it's a card that I could turn into a spell snare or a dispel in a blink of an eye and not notice the change whatsoever. Like it would be perfectly fine.
If you want to know how I feel about Angel's Grace in the modern metagame, Cal, you ready for this? I would rather you play Trickbind. That's how I feel about Angel's Grace right now.
Well, I'm not going to play Trickbind. So.
I know. And you know that's how I feel about Trickbind too.
Yeah.
It is, as time goes on, I am hearing more and more and more and more loopholes for Angel's Grace. And what's crazy is because people are concerned about One Ring protection, they are finding ways to get around Angel's Grace and the One Ring at the same time without realizing it. So there's all of these decks that have now just Angel's Grace baked in lines that you're able to go, okay, cool, they still win though.
Right.
And that's a bad time. It's a very bad time for you.
No, that's fair. Yeah, that's probably an outdated card that I could easily cut. I want to replace that with a counterspell.
Incredibly basic.
I don't know what counterspell though. Right now I'm on Pact and Offer. You can't refuse, Flusterstorm, Misstep.
You're already on
Strix
too. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like on the classics. You know what I mean? Like I'm
Yeah,
on
for
all
sure,
the
for
stuff,
sure.
and that's where I I look down there and there's like, okay, well, there's Dispel
Yeah.
potentially. There's Spell Snare. I don't like Spell Snare as much
In the
anymore
modern
now that
metagame,
Dockside's gone.
it doesn't do as much as it used to, you know? I
Yeah,
totally agree with you. Um,
yeah,
I feel like it's probably Dispel in that circumstance, right? Like, you don't have
yeah,
one of those, what I like to call bad instant counters, right? So Miscast or Dispel. Um,
right.
you have
And
stubs kind of, right, for that purpose, but
yeah, I don't like, and you know this, I really don't like Miscast, but
I agree, and I think Miscast had its time in the sun. I think, the 6 months before the ban, Miscast was better than it's ever been by a long
yeah,
shot, and then it got really fucking bad really quick as soon as the ban
yeah.
happened.
Could always play a Dovin's Veto. You know what I mean? Just play a good old Dovin's Veto. Um, you know. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's how I feel about it too. You know.
Yeah, yeah, for
I
sure.
will say I have really liked Strix Serenade in
Yeah.
this deck. It has just felt great to
I
have another
yeah,
1 mana counter spell.
legitimately think that card is kinda underplayed right now.
I
I
100%.
yeah, I was kind of not a believer, but then I sort of went to a couple tournaments in a row where I was like, "All right, where was the choke points in these tournaments?" And I was like, "Well, we kept losing in scenarios where someone got a little too squawky about, like, not wanting to force of will something or not wanting to pact something or not wanting to
Hmm.
use up their mind break trap on a creature." And I was like, every single time it was they had these debates, and I was like,
Hmm.
and if they had just had a 1 mana counterspell that said "fuck off," like, then they would be fine, right? Like,
And this is the thing, is that I think in this metagame, you know, where where creatures are the best they've probably been in a while
yeah,
right now.
yeah,
And you gotta have, and almost everybody's win cons are like creatures these
yeah,
days.
yeah,
You know, you gotta have some way of interacting with that. You know, I do with delay and mana drain, but I fully agree. It doesn't
mhm,
feel great to use those on,
yeah,
you know, a Kinnan
right,
or something like that. You know, Strict Serenade for 1 mana. Yeah, I'll hit your Kinnan for
mhm,
1 mana.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll counter your Glarb with this. Like those are
mhm,
things that I feel perfectly fine doing.
yeah,
Strict Serenade, I think, is maybe one of the most, I fully agree with you, underplayed cards like in the format right now.
yep,
Um, you know, so I like the interaction suite generally.
mhm,
Um, you know, I don't know that there's much that I would add in that regard.
mhm,
Um, and so yeah, 2 cards left. This is where I was like, I want another creature at the like 2 to
mhm,
like 3 mana range is like
sure,
generally where
sure,
I'm looking at there.
okay,
Um, you know, some of the stuff that I have looked at, there's like clones, obviously, that I could play in
yeah,
that
yeah.
slot. But
It's funny that you actually bring up a 2 to 3 mana card, because
mhm,
one thing that I was pretty heavily considering for this deck is actually the new Kumbal, from OTJ.
really,
Yeah.
okay. Tell me why.
So, couple small things, right? Like, it's a good value play, right? This is definitely
Hmm.
not like the game winner, right? But like, we can all absolutely vehemently agree that Tivet is a deck in which, attrition based value is good, right? Like
Right.
the ability to just like make small game actions at a time that slowly kill your opponents, right? So Kumbal's really good at doing that. Plus the fact that obviously this deck is mana intensive from a
Right.
number of different circumstances, right? And just the fact that like your opponents then enter this scenario where you're basically like, hey, if you ever wheel into my smothering tithe, you die. Like is
Yeah.
a pretty good incentive. Plus the fact that like, makes incidental bodies from like bowmaster tokens. I guess they just die in that circumstance, but they drain your opponents for one if
Sure.
they ever have a OBM and ETB. Smothering tides are giving you at least one treasure per turn, right? Like the sort of passive value of tokens that can sort of exist in the course of the game. And this is also just coming from like I play in a meta where a lot of players play this card.
Mhm.
In the Philadelphia area specifically, like Kumbal is actually a card that a lot of people play, including shout out to Niall, who plays that deck as the actual commander is Kumbal.
Mhm.
But in general, I just see the card accrue like a pretty hefty amount of value just over the course of a lot of these games, where it's just like picks up a little thing here, picks up a little thing here, and even with
Yeah.
Tivet, right? For those who aren't familiar with, I guess, some of the intricacies of Tivet, because of the way it's worded, investigations are individual triggers, whereas treasures come in as one chunk, right? Because
Right.
it specifically says if you choose X mode, investigate, as opposed to it says create a clue token, right? So the way that it works with Tivet is for every treasure, your opponents would be drained for one, right? But for every individual clue, that's an individual drain that Tivet would apply to the table with the way
Right.
the ball is phrased, right? So so basically doing like if you end up with the classic Tivet split, which is 2 treasures 3 clues, right, that's immediately 4 every time you're hitting the table and draining them for a good amount, right? Which is like not trivial, right? But that's also like the upper end of it, and it's still unlike something like Mirkwood Bats, which I know has been talked about previously in the past with
Ugh.
Tivet, right? This actually does stuff outside of just that
Right.
part, right?
Right.
Which is the reason I kind of like it a little more, you know.
Yeah. No, I like the cut of your jib with this.
Hmm.
It's very in line with some of the like thinking I've been on of like, potentially the issue is like these types of cards are the
Mhm.
cards that I want to get games in with to see how I feel about
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Because I've also been thinking about like Stride Hanger Automaton and
Right.
Academy Manufactor. Um,
Well, this is
because
why I'm bringing this up now, because I think you and I have had like a little bit of those conversations about some of those pieces that are basically like, how far into Marnius do you want to go as Tivet, right?
yes, this is because historically I have been very anti
Yeah.
Academy Manufactor
Yep.
sort of cards in Tivet.
You and I agree. But the reason I'm dying on the Kumbal Hill is I think you can slot this in as a one of, right?
Right.
While also still like it still does stuff that Tivet wants. That's why I like this one in comparison to a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
like because like you and I have talked a lot about some of these like high synergy pieces before, right?
Yeah.
But I think this one actually just doesn't fall on its own dick, right? Like
No, I think this like has play that I like. I think that is the Kumbal, the second feature, the first ability on this, I think, is maybe the least attractive personally.
Sure.
Like I think it's fine. But
Yeah,
I think the ability triggers once each turn is a real bummer.
it is for sure. But
It's fair.
you will be
but-
surprised how often it's still relevant. Is my
I fully believe that. But the real thing that I'm intrigued by it is the second ability. Like that's the part of it there I go,
Yeah, that's something, isn't it?
Yeah, that's something. That makes me think a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. If I can find one before because it's like one of the things is it's like just expensive enough and sees just enough play in like standard, where it's like kind of a coin flip if you can find one.
I think it's also just a popular casual card, unless I'm crazy.
Yes, I believe that is accurate.
Also, to anyone in the audience who is critical of the way I pronounce that card, it is actually pronounced that way. I know there's a lot of.
I'm going to call it cam ball until
yeah. I'm aware of how that could potentially sound, but yes, it is gumball. Thanks, thank you for that, Kyle.
You're welcome.
Okay, wait. Can I say?
Yes.
This card in German is called Kumbal Corrupter Bürgermeister, which I think is the best, actually.
Okay, well, I'm not playing it now because I'm needing to get a German
copy of it.
Like, I got to get a German copy of this. Holy shit, that's incredible.
About to go raid the TCG player right about now.
Yep, BRB guys, we've got some transactions to complete. Yeah, this is the thing. Is it's like this 2 to 3 mana slot is always kind of the question mark for me.
Yeah,
because it can be like a lot of stuff. It could just be flesh duplicate, and then you're playing like the whole suite of copy effects at that point. I don't know if that's the route I want to go, because I'm already on Mockingbird and
a lot
Phyrexian
of clones
Metamorph.
already. I would be a little concerned with like the fact that we're trying to put creatures in the graveyard and then having a bunch of cards in our hand that go like, where are the creatures?
yeah, that's kind of my feeling on that. Dauntless Dismantler just doesn't feel good anymore. Just doesn't do what it once did, which is great because that means I don't have to dedicate a slot to it any longer.
Good. Yeah, no, I was already I'm even skeptical of Blind Obedience at this point, if that gives some context.
I think because there are enough Glarbs and enough Kittens and enough of those things rolling around that I like having stuff that slows that down.
Sure.
That's truthfully, this might be weird. What's the Archon that I'm thinking of? The 3-mana Rule of Law and lands and creatures that are tapped. Why Archon of
Emiria?
Yeah, I think that is a card that I have thought about in this deck.
Whoa, big. That'd be crazy.
Yeah, I know that's not a card that I have historically liked in control decks, but
yeah,
I do think that like if you're going to be playing, like you basically play it like to back. If you're going to play a Rule of Law effect in a control deck, you use it to back up your counter spells, so you get super selective with what you're countering. Which has been how I've used them in the past. Yeah. I don't know that I fully believe in it, but it's mostly about the fact that I'm just like, man, I like being able to just slow my opponents down, because I'm perfectly fine just playing a spell and moving on. You know what I mean?
Have you considered Aethersworn Canonist for that specific role?
I have not, but I don't hate that either.
Because that at least allows you to like hypothetically go like, all right, cool, like Mana Vault into another rock, like, you know, and go from there.
Right. Yeah.
Which is something I think that makes sense. Good at. Yeah.
I think the issue I'm having is that like the like stuff that I'm talking about is all stuff that I want to like test before I play it. You know what I mean? Like
that's one I would not just go in raw with, I think.
Yes. Like that's where I'm at. These are things that I'm thinking about, and you know, well, maybe I think I'm going to put Transmute Artifact back in now because I can play my proxy at this event. So that leaves me with one slot left. I don't know, man. Do I just play Git Probe?
No. Whatever you do, it's not that.
All right.
Okay, Cal.
Yes.
So for a Tivet deck, right?
Okay.
You do have a low artifact count right now, right?
I do.
One artifact that supposedly, from what I hear in the grapevine, it's pretty good for control players, right? An artifact that would allow you to potentially shape the entire course of the game by giving you perfect information in windows where you might not previously have it, right? Imagine this. You're sitting there and your opponents are like, nah, man, I'm not the problem. And then sort of Spider-Man pointing at one person who goes, nah, man, I'm not the problem. You're like, oh, there's some sort of card that would allow me to validate sort of this decision, to be able to determine which one of these sort of finger pointers is actually the problem at the table. If only there was an artifact that I could tap and then potentially target that player and look and look at their hand.
No.
If only one of those.
I own a Glasses of Urza, and the answer is no.
If only one of those hypothetical cards existed.
No.
I just feel like you're being kind of a narc.
I have taken in your consideration, and I have politely decided that you're full of crap.
But wait. Honestly, should I play it in Glarb?
No.
Doesn't cost 4. It's a bit of a downside.
Yeah, it's a bit of a boner, isn't it? Bit of a boner killer.
Yeah, boner killer, not a boner.
Yeah.
One day you'll give it a shot.
Yeah, one day I'll give it a shot in a deck that you built in a casual game, and then and I'll go, yeah, this sure does it, Ian. Anyway, back to my deck.
Well,
I hope that Kool-Aid tastes really good. I'm sure it must be real scrumptious. Because
to be fair, it's a Kool-Aid that I am 100% drinking and also have never played in a deck.
Oh God, I don't think you could pay me to play that in a deck. That's just
haterade for sure.
Yeah.
Just like Cabal.
Well, if I can find one, I would probably put Cabal in.
Okay, so here's the deal. Hypothetically, let's get two versions of this list up, right?
Okay.
There is the Languish and fill in the blank card here list, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there is the Nuclear Fallout Cabal list, right?
Okay.
We'll call it optimaltive and availabletive.
Availabletive. My dream girl, my available girl.
Woof. Any follow-up jokes I will refrain from for the sake of our podcast.
Yeah, it's good.
Honestly, you could also just probably play fucking Mirror Maid and be like, oh, I'm copying Ristic Study.
Yeah, I hate that.
I know.
So
hey, look, I hate
EV.
it too.
Feels so low EV.
No, it's wondering. It's Ristic Study.
Yeah, that's what everybody does, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll
And
consider it.
Yeah. I like Mirror Maid specifically because of how flexible it is. I will throw that out there.
It is more flexible than like a copy artifact or copy enchantment.
Right.
I'll give you that. I think we might have gone too deep on the copy effects, folks. But that's just me. The real answer here is that if I want to copy a One Ring, I'm just gonna go search up the Phyrexian Metamorph that I have in my deck that I can tutor way easier.
Mm-hmm.
And like I'm not countering, or I'm not copying your study. I don't care. I play my own Ristic Study. If I want a Ristic Study out badly enough, I will tutor my Ristic Study.
Sure.
That's generally how I feel about that. I don't know. There's cards like Unstoppable Plan is one that I've like, this could be good.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it is good, but it could be.
Yeah.
Maybe I just play a 4th Wrath and play Winds of Abandon.
It's possible. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Well, I'll decide between now and Saturday.
I can't imagine that's the move, but yeah.
I don't think that's the move. The answer might actually be just playing like a Fairy Mastermind, honestly. If I really want, that feels like that might be it. Holy shit, that's $25 now?
Oh, yeah.
Damn.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. I bought that when it was like $2.
Yeah.
$2 in a dream. Well, anyway.
Yeah. Is there a world where you swap Dothy with Meme Bet?
Theoretically, yeah. The issue I've always had with Meme Bet in this is that it feels really hard to convert Meme Bets.
Okay.
Because I can. It just requires you to. When I've played the like more Nausea, more Necro version of this deck, converting Meme Bets didn't feel hard at all because I like had all the stuff that like pops off of those cards really well.
Gotcha.
When I'm playing more like this, what I kind of find is that a lot of the time I'm just kind of like sitting there with a bunch of control pieces in my hand. And unless my opponents have like the shit going on, I'm just like, well, here's a bunch of cards, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think it's bad. I think it's very good. I just have never had great success with it.
Yeah, fair enough.
In my play with it, but
yeah,
I don't know. The other card that I always keep coming back to is Narset, because I've always loved Narset here.
I think if you're on Narset, you probably want like a wheel, right? Like
yeah, that's kind of always been my issue with it, right? Is like if you play it, it kind of like funnels you into like playing another thing.
Yeah.
And I generally don't like it when my cards funnel me into playing another card.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I want to play in that last slot. That's the issue. It might just be Fairy Mastermind. I think it's just going to be Fairy Mastermind. And then if I feel strongly about something else, I will play something else. Like, I do want to test Kimball, though. Like, I really like... I'm smoking what you're selling or whatever the fuck. Buying what you're selling. I think you know, it makes sense to me. And I think that, like, feels like a reasonable use of 3 mana in this. Because I think that's like kind of always like my evaluation, right? Is okay, do I want to spend 3 mana on this or not? You know what I mean? But yeah, no, I think this feels like a sturdy, healthy list.
Where are we going there, bud?
I don't know, man. Ian, if people want to do what we have done today with you, in what one might call a coaching session,
really feeling articulate today, aren't we?
Yes. If somebody would like to have, you know, see this kind of experience and are like, hey, I think that would be helpful for me as well, how can they get a hold of you so that they could book a coaching session?
Yeah, everybody. So if you're curious, reach out to me at comedianmtg@gmail.com or any of the places in my link tree that's in the description down below. If you're interested in hiring my professional services, if you're interested in taking that step up in your cEDH gaming, if you're interested in just workshopping a list like we did here today. I think, you know, that Cal and I definitely had a little bit more of our like friend throw wall stuff at the wall energy than is will usually be present in an event like that. But that being said, come on by. We'll do some cool stuff and figure out some cool innovations for your respective deck list.
Yeah. If you want somebody to recommend you Radical Almistics, you can join the Patreon Discord by checking us out on patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors. All of that goes to helping keep this thing running because it takes money to pay for subscriptions to Adobe Premiere and things like that. But, you know, we greatly appreciate everybody. If you want to join the Crop Check meta, you can go over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors. We greatly appreciate that. Also, if you would be so kind and, you know, just leave an offering for Algorithm Jesus, we would greatly appreciate that too, if you don't want to spend some money. With that being said, Ian, what do you think we should say to the boys and girls in the days as we leave? What should be our what should be the message that we leave our audience? We should be imparting upon the children who watch the show.
Yeah, I think for all the youth out there, for all the youngins, the little homies, as I like to call them, this one's out. Shout out to y'all. Remember, you're only as young as you were yesterday plus one day. So
this is the Mind Sculptors. I'm Cal.
I mean,
stay sculpty, everybody.
Bye.